What's up guys, CJ here and welcome to the Hybrid Network review of Star Wars Rebels Season 3 premiere, ominously titled Steps into the Shadows. The last time we saw our heroes, they were in pretty bad shape. Kanan had just been blinded by Darth Maul, and Ahsoka was, and still is, presumably dead at the hands of her old master, Darth Vader. Now before we go any further, major spoilers ahead. This is a recap and review. I'll be going over this story and then talking about it a little bit, and kind of as we go along. Everybody here that wants to be here, alright. So, fast forwarding to the present, believe it or not, we're now just 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the crew continues to strike against the Empire, but they're not led by Kanan, which we'll discuss, but rather by an older, more experienced Ezra, who's actually, surprisingly, starting to look like something resembling a Jedi. The only downside is he's only gotten so much more powerful in the Force by studying the Sith holocron, which speaks to him at some points kind of like the One Ring, as if you didn't need to know it was bad news. Regardless of that, the episode opens with an absolutely action-packed scene, Ezra leading the team on a daring rescue mission, trying to spring one of their informants from an Imperial prison. That informant, to the crew's surprise, but not to ours maybe, turns out to be their old pal Hondo and his cellmate Turba the Ugnaught. And if you don't remember the Ugnaughts from Empire Strikes Back, think Lil Piggy. The plan quickly goes south as Turba deserts them, only to meet an untimely end at the hands of an Imperial walker. Cornered and with all seeming dire for our team, Ezra shows off his newfound powers in basically one of the darkest moments of the series so far. In some sort of advanced mind control style mind trick, Ezra takes control of the walker's pilot, forcing him to turn on his fellow stormtroopers before forcing him to walk off the platform, falling to his death. It's the kind of moment that really seems like it'll set the tone for the show this season, what we kind of got a hint at later in Season 2, especially the finale. They're not pulling punches anymore, and we're wading into some really grim territory. Meanwhile, back at their new base on Atollon, Kanan is, well, what we're led to assume he's been doing since he was blinded, which is to say, mostly keeping to himself and meditating. This all comes to an end when a mysterious voice reaches out through the distance, summoning him, and Kanan sets off on this journey, only to find a mysterious and very large creature waiting for him. The Bendu. The Bendu, I'm just going to spoil this for you, is one of the real highlights of this episode. He's this massive, Force-sensitive, ape-looking being, and he really guides Kanan, essentially teaching him to quiet his mind, and more or less helping him to balance himself and trust in the Force, despite the shock of the loss of his sight, which he's been struggling with since it happened. He also provides some welcome moral ambiguity when it comes to the Force, reminding Kanan that the Force itself is essentially neutral, and that the Sith holocron isn't what's turning Ezra to the dark side, it's his desire to be more powerful that's doing that, even though that power he wants is just to help his friends. It's a more topical and specific version of that old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but it's something Kanan needed to hear. His mind is cleared, he gets out of his funk, he leaves the Sith holocron with the Bendu and is ready to rejoin the fight just in time. Back to the Ghost crew, Hondo has informed them of a secluded Imperial station on a gas giant planet, which just happens to house a few dozen Y-Wings, which the new rebellion could definitely make use of. So, the crew's mission? Light reconnaissance, scout out the defenses, and then return to base. Of course, it doesn't go to plan, but for more on why, we'll talk about that later. And this whole sequence is fantastic. Any description I give won't do it justice. Essentially, they don't have the element of surprise that they think they do, and with the Y-Wings being destroyed by the Empire to keep them out of rebel hands, Ezra makes the executive decision to save as many of them as possible against orders. One thing leads to another, Hondo abandons them, the crew escapes in Y-Wings, while Ezra seems to be going down with the now depowered Imperial station, which is now hurtling towards the planet's surface. Who else comes to save the day just in the nick of time but Kanan? It's something their relationship badly needed, as Ezra, up until that point we're told, kind of resented Kanan for more or less just abandoning him since the end of the Season 2 finale. And with that, the episode ends on a seemingly much more hopeful note than what we saw when we were leaving Season 2. Kanan and Ezra are reunited and they're working towards a common goal. The Y-Wings are secured and the Lothal Resistance Pocket is now working towards what will soon become the actual Rebel Alliance, which is one of my favorite little details they sprinkled into this episode. Even in a really good episode such as this, when almost everything worked well, there are a couple of things that stand above the rest. First and foremost, the Bendu is one, but as for the other major highlight to me, I've got 3 words for you. Grand Admiral Thrawn. As a lifelong Star Wars fan, both of the movies and of the EU, basically since birth, I honestly never thought we'd see the day when Thrawn existed off of the page, and now that it's here, he's as good as I could have hoped. We see him less in this episode than you might expect if you've watched some trailers. In fact, he's only very briefly in 2 scenes, but he makes his presence known from the get-go, and you have no doubt who's now calling the shots for the Empire at the end of this episode. In fact, he pretty much instantly knows what the rebels are going to do in going for the Y-Wings, and what their objective is finally, which is why the Imperials were so prepared on the station and why they were destroying the Y-Wings in the first place. And that was after basically studying them for 2 seconds, so long story short, the rebels should be very, very worried. There are a couple of negatives for this episode though in my mind, even as good as it is. First and foremost, it kind of feels like a few things were rushed and tied up just a little too neatly, especially considering this is the first episode back. For example, Kanan struggles with his blindness and his whole outlook changing in essentially 15 minutes. While I love the Bendu and I hope we see more of him, I would have liked to see Kanan's storyline in that explored a bit more before finishing it up. Another prime example is Ezra and the Holocron. While I get the feeling that Ezra's struggles with the dark side will continue to be a theme of the season and maybe the show going forward, to have the Holocron seemingly out of the picture already, it just feels like another story thread kind of glossed over. Anyways, even in light of those, the episode is fantastic still, and with the threat of Thrawn looming, things will only get more grim for the young Rebel Alliance. Overall, I'll give Star Wars Rebels Season 3 Episodes 1 and 2 Step Into the Shadows an 8.5 out of 10. Don't forget to smash that like if you like what you saw, and subscribe for more great content every single day, and maybe consider supporting us on Patreon for access to all sorts of exclusive goodies. Signing off, this is CJ, and I'll see you next time.